The following program, Live and Learn, is made possible by Aging Partners. Find out more on their website at agingpartners@lincoln.ne.gov.
Por favor, acompáñame a darle la bienvenida a Clayton Naff, Director Ejecutivo de Alfabetización de Lincoln. I'm Kristen Stowes. Did my introduction confuse you? We will explore those feelings and many others as I talk with Clayton Naff.
I'm Tom White, and today I'll be discussing the subject of ageism with UNO gerontology professor Dr. Lynn Holly.
Hi, I'm Lita Powell-Drake, and my guest today is Danielle Conrad. She's the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union in Nebraska, and we're going to address equal pay for equal work and also the freedom to marry in Nebraska. So this is going to be interesting. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm your host, Tim Francis with Live and Learn. Today we're meeting with Kim Taylor Riley with the Commission on Human Rights. We're discussing fair housing, discrimination, tolerance, and a certain amount of intolerance.
This and more on today's Live and Learn.
Welcome to Live and Learn. I'm Chris Beckenbaugh. On behalf of all of the hosts and our team here at Live and Learn, we want to welcome you to this special episode that we hope you will take the time to watch and consider, to possibly watch again, and then discuss with your friends and family. We'll be bringing to you the differing aspects of tolerance. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the chapter on Acceptance Was the Answer, quotes this: "If I focus on a problem, the problem increases. If I focus on the answer increases." We want to focus on the answer of tolerance. Tolerance is defined as the ability or willingness to tolerate something, in particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that does not necessarily agree with your views and your beliefs. Some other definitions of tolerance include acceptance, open-mindedness, broad-mindedness, forbearance, liberty, liberality, liberalism, patience, charity, indulgence, and understanding. And so in this particular episode, as we celebrate Valentine's Day in February, we want to open our hearts to caring and charity and understanding, and we hope that's what you'll take from this special episode of Live and Learn.
What does Medicare cover? How can I afford to keep living in my home? When I need help with house and yard work, who can I turn to? Why am I so tired? Am I eating right? Should I exercise? Where can I go for answers to my questions about aging?
Aging Partners is the place to call when you have questions on aging. Our experts are here to help you with unbiased answers for you or your loved ones. Aging Partners, we're only a phone call away.
What are your feelings when you meet someone who cannot speak or understand English? Are you frightened, uncomfortable, or perhaps judgmental? I'm Kristen Stowes, and my guest is trying to make a positive impact on that very situation. I welcome Clayton Naff, Executive Director of Lincoln Literacy. Wonderful to have you here today.
Glad to be with you, Kristen.
Good. Let's start by hearing about your own background.
Well, you know, Lincoln Literacy serves many immigrants and refugees. My first experience with a refugee came just about the time Lincoln Literacy was created, way back in 1972. I was a kid then, believe it or not, and the family next door took in a refugee from the war in Bangladesh. Most of us don't remember that now, but it was a terrible civil war. And this was a skinny young man, about 20 years old, who had stowed aboard a freighter to get away from the carnage in his home country. And they asked me, a little teenage kid, to help him learn English. So I did, and it was a wonderful experience for me. He went on and got a job, and then he started his own little business. It was very inspiring to me. So many, many decades later, this became the natural and most appealing job for me. But in between times, I became a journalist, And I had the great privilege of going overseas to report in Japan.
You did?
I was a correspondent in Tokyo.
Oh, my.
And my first few months there, I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. Because even though I had studied Japanese intensively, there was just so much that was so different. And I just felt like a complete bumbling idiot.
So you really learned by experience.
I did, but I had a privileged experience there. But when people are forced to flee their countries and come here, or are seeking desperately to change their circumstances and come as immigrants, that experience is just incomparably more difficult.
Very much so. So then along the way, you found yourself in the nonprofit arena. When did you start with Lincoln Literacy?
I got started almost 10 years ago, toward the end
Okay.
of 2005.
Could you please tell us, what is the mission of Lincoln Literacy?
Sure. Lincoln Literacy is a mainly volunteer group, and our mission is to help people of all cultures, including our own, to better themselves and to strengthen the community by teaching English language and literacy skills.
And it does definitely strengthen the community.
Indeed.
That's an important component of that. Yes. What is the population of non-English speaking residents in Lincoln and Lancaster County?
You know, that's a great question. It's been changing rapidly over the last few decades. It used to be that diversity in Lincoln and all of Nebraska meant, you know, did your folks come from the Czech region or the German region? But now diversity is really representative of the whole world. And more than 1/10 of the households in Lincoln and Lancaster County have people whose first language is not English.
Yes.
So many of them have learned English, but half or more are still struggling to master our native language.
How many different languages does that represent then in
Well, the
Lincoln?
count goes up and down, and recently it went up a bit because recently we've begun to have large numbers of refugees from Burma. And that's a country with many different subcultures, and each one has a different language. So our rough count is between 60 and 80.
Oh my.
That's a lot of languages.
Quite a few, yes.
And obviously we don't speak them all.
No. So you do work with immigrant and refugee populations. Do you also work with illiterate American-born citizens?
Absolutely, and not just illiterate, but people who are struggling with their communication skills in reading or writing, or even math. So our, what we call our adult basic students, people whose first language is English, range from people who've had brain injury and can't read or write properly, to people who have learning disabilities, to people who are just, through life circumstances, they didn't graduate and they need a second chance, and they can do it. They can get their GED, they can go on beyond that. So it's quite a range of people.
Wow, that is a range, that is a range. So I'm assuming there are different degrees and forms of illiteracy as well. Some not able to speak the language, maybe some not able to write or comprehend, so that's a range right there.
Kristen, you're absolutely right. Literacy is a much bigger concept than many of us, including me, sometimes think. When I came to this job, I was just focused on reading and writing, but I quickly realized that computer skills are part of literacy. Literacy is essentially those basic skills you need to navigate life in a complex modern society.
Sure.
So it includes computer skills, obviously oral English, and of course reading and writing in English. But other kinds of literacy are coming into play as well. You need some basic scientific literacy to get along in a modern society. You need health literacy to read the prescription instructions on a medicine. So there are just many, many facets of life where our volunteers come into play to make life for those we serve better, but also to strengthen our community.
So important, so important. So this is just a sizable undertaking here.
Yes.
How have you observed intolerance of non-English speaking residents?
Well, you know, I live in a happy situation because all the volunteers who come to us are good-hearted people who want to reach out to others, and all of the learners who come to us want to learn. But we do occasionally observe it, and we hear about much more out in the community. Typically, intolerance springs from fear and ignorance. And whenever I've encountered it, I've found that to be true. One day I was at my desk and the phone rang and I picked it up, and a man started on a rant with me about how English is the legal language of Nebraska. It's in the law. Well, he's absolutely right.
Yes.
It's in the law that was passed right after World War I when there was a lot of bigotry against Germans. They were outlawing teaching German, and it became a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck it down. So it's on our books, but it's an invalid law. But I told him, Of course, we agree with you. The people who come to us want to learn English. And every study shows that immigrants, since the beginning of our republic to this very day, have always struggled to learn English. Their kids have learned better, and by the third generation, like you and me, they only speak English.
Sure.
Well, I shouldn't assume that for you, but most of us don't know the language of our grandparents.
Right, right. Oh no, that's very true. So when we spoke before, we talked about some of the intolerant traits we might see in others, possibly distrust, unkindness, rudeness, avoidance, and a couple of things that you noted before were fear and ignorance.
Right.
And why do you think that this particular kind of intolerance exists?
Well, there's no question that some of this is amped up by the media. Immigration is a hot button topic, and there are legitimate issues across the spectrum in our immigration law.
Mm-hmm.
But immigrants themselves are by and large people who just want to improve their lives, as every generation that has either been born in America or come to America has. People sometimes forget that Einstein was a refugee, the most brilliant man in the world. People tend to fix on stereotypes, and their stereotypes of immigrants and refugees are often highly negative. But in fact, even today, immigrants and refugees are contributing some of the most vital aspects of our economy. They start more businesses than average. Google was founded. Heard of Google?
Yep,
It's something of a big company. It was co-founded by an immigrant. And that kind of story just spreads across the board. So if people can overcome their fear in order to learn a little bit more, then I think the intolerance fades away. And we certainly see a lot of barriers fall between our volunteers and our students. Culture also comes into it. Instinct comes into it as well. Culture helps us get comfortable with each other real quickly because we know what to expect from each other. But if you don't have the habit of shaking hands, and I do, that creates a little awkwardness right at first. But we can get past that. So really working our way through some of these issues almost always drains the swamps of intolerance from a society.
So if we recognize some of these intolerant traits in ourselves, those are very good ideas for us to work on, along with just putting yourself in that other person's shoes, I think.
You're so right. We're all human, and every human being has the same basic aspirations, the same basic fears and desires. If we can keep that in mind, it goes a long way.
That's right. What difficulties does the non-English speaking population have that we might not think of? Some might be very subtle.
You're absolutely right. Oftentimes refugees have grown up in miserable and highly deprived circumstances, and then they find themselves suddenly here in a very different society, and things like using a keypad are totally foreign concepts to them.
Oh, wow.
The numerals on the keypad may be very different from their own numbering system. So just to basically do a transaction in a grocery store might be a really new and scary experience for refugees or immigrants. There are countless others, and I could, if we had all day, I could tell you stories of my difficulties in Japan. I like to think I'm a reasonably smart guy, but I tell you, navigating a new society is a huge challenge.
I'm certain of that. And we also talked about conversational English, how different that is from traditional English. That's really two different languages right there.
You're absolutely right. Book learning isn't enough.
That's right.
We casually use our language in such baffling ways. I think one of the stories that sticks in my mind is when one of our students asked me, why when I say thank you, you say, you bet? And I thought, I don't know why. It's just something we say.
It makes no sense.
It doesn't seem to. And we add prepositions to verbs to totally change the meaning. We say turn up, turn down, turn in, turn out.
Well, that's
Those all have
true.
radically different meanings.
That's right.
How are you going to know?
Yeah, yeah. So do you see great changes in people after they've begun to learn and understand the language?
Absolutely. And more than that, the changes on both sides. Our learners we call these the gateway skills because once they achieve them, the gates are thrown wide open and they have all sorts of opportunities, and their kids do as well. And some of them come back and volunteer with us after they've mastered English. But on the volunteer tutor side as well, we survey our tutors twice a year, and the comment that we consistently and most often get is, I got more out of this than my student did. We know that's not true. Their students got incomparable value, but they did learn a lot, and they somehow feel changed for the better by that experience.
That is wonderful. That is that speaks highly of your program, I think.
Well, it's the volunteers who do it, quite honestly. I just try to keep everything together.
How many people do you actually teach in 1 year?
I can tell you the number fresh off the
Really?
database.
All right.
In 2014, we served 1,140 people.
Really?
And they ranged in age from 3 years old to 79.
Oh my goodness, I would have never thought that number. That's amazing.
It amazes me too,
That
and
is-
it's really a
that is
testament
really
to our
amazing.
volunteers.
Well, I know you have a favorite success story that about how Lincoln Literacy helped an individual. It's a very poignant story, and I would like to have you share that
Oh,
with us.
absolutely. You know, we have many, many conventional success stories that we like to share, but this one's a little bit different. A woman came to us after having been forced to flee Afghanistan about a decade ago when the Taliban first took over that country. They killed her husband, they drove her and her mother and 2 children across the border into Pakistan. There, she was forcibly separated from her 2 young sons. They were, I think, 5 and 7 or thereabouts. She and her mother got away. They eventually made it to a refugee camp, and after some years, they found themselves in Lincoln. She came to our English classes. She learned enough to become a U.S. citizen eventually, but she was
Really?
always so sad.
Yes.
And we didn't really know what it was about until she trusted us enough to share the story of losing her children. And then, after she got her U.S. passport, after gaining U.S. citizenship, somebody helped her get on the internet and search, and she found her kids.
Really?
They were in Scandinavia, I think in Norway. They too had become refugees. They were now in their late teens or early 20s, and once they reunited, they sent her an airplane ticket to go visit them. And the day before she left, she was floating off the ground. I'd never seen anything like it.
Well, talk about a life-changing
Absolutely.
event.
Such joy.
Such joy. I agree. That's a perfect story. I believe we have the website to put on screen. So if our viewers are interested in bringing that up and learning more about Lincoln Literacy or possibly about being a tutor, can they find all of that information there?
They sure can, and I hope some will, because tutoring is something that is very rewarding for the people who do it, but it's life-changing for the people who benefit from it. And we always need more. Last year we had about 300 tutors, but as I said, more than 1,000 people benefited, and there are more every day.
Well, I think we should all think about that. Clayton, thank you so much for being with us. Lincoln is certainly a much better community for the important work that you are doing.
Oh, thank you,
Thanks for
Kristen.
being
It's
here.
been great to be here.
Please remember, patience and understanding are key. We all walk through life together, but just in different ways. Our motto certainly applies. It's never too late to live and learn. Thanks for being with us.
Here's a thought from Marvin Ashton regarding tolerance. If we could look into each other's hearts and understand the unique challenges each of us faces, I think we would treat each other much more gently, with more love, patience, tolerance, and care. Marvin J. Ashton.
Hello, I'm Tom White, and my guest today is Dr. Lynn Holly. Dr. Holly is a full professor at UNO and currently serving as Vice President of the UNO Faculty Senate. She is the past recipient of awards for teaching excellence, which include the 2009 UNO Alumni Association Teacher of the Year Award and the 2010 UNO Faculty Service Learning Award. She has published articles in several journals, including The Gerontologist and Educational Gerontology. She earned her PhD from UNO in 1999 after working in gerontology research at the University of Kansas and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She joined the UNO faculty in 2004. Welcome to Live and Learn, Dr. Holly.
Thank you,
It's
Tom
so
White.
good to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And first of all, can you tell us, what does ageism look like?
Well, it's invisible.
Okay.
Actually, it's kind of like the flu in that way. It's possible to photograph effects of ageism. It's possible to accumulate statistics that demonstrate ageism, do experimental research that shows that ageism influences behavior, but we can't really see it because, as you were just saying when we were talking about it, it's all inside. That's where ageism lives. Ageism is one of the isms. It's like racism. It is part of the way we're brought up to understand the world. It starts very, very soon, possibly prenatally. It's just part of our culture. We believe in our culture it's a certain model of what is it like to be old. It's losing many of your physical abilities decline, your mental abilities decline. You'll be maybe a little grouchy, a little cranky. You will probably be less wealthy, if not poor. You will probably be requiring a lot of things from other people, assistance. Needy, decrepit, senile. Somewhere that's in there. And then what happens is it gets introduced to us when we're very, very young, pre-verbal. That's where we learn our culture even, before you even have words to defend yourself in your own head. So it's in there on many different levels. And as we are young, we're not personally experiencing it, and we're learning that that's what age is. And we learn to fear that because, wow, that's what happens to people if they don't die. That's the alternative, right? You could always avoid being old if you die first. So that's a way to avoid it. But you can also avoid even thinking about it or becoming aware of your own attitude about it if you fear it, if you think you will be old someday, and you just assume not think about it until that time happens. And so then you get into a kind of avoidance thing, and you're operating just on pilot. So what ageism does is it teaches you that that's what it's like to be old, and that you will be old someday. And so there's a bad mix. And so what you need to do then to protect yourself psychologically is make sure that there's a big bright line between you and old people. Me not old, you old. And that's it's easier to do when you're 20 than it is when you're 50, but that a lot of people do that. And so then that's another person, another sort of another part of our species, and what happens to them is what happens to another person. Okay. Then, when you become old yourself, you look in the mirror one day and it's inescapable, even with a lot of Botox or whatever. It's inescapable.
Don't people try to push age away with all those cosmetic?
That fear makes them very vulnerable to all kinds of exploitation and to self-damaging themselves. And there are many things you can do to lead a healthy life which will make your old age much better at every stage. You can start when you're 5, 15, 25, 55, and all those lifestyle things will make your own old age much easier and better. But you can't stave off all of it. And in the meanwhile, the biomedicalization of aging, there's a huge profit being made on people needing to look young so that people don't discriminate against them because they're old.
So what are some more of the signs of ageism? How would you spot the sign? So how can any of us spot signs of ageism?
Well, you can look for separatism. School, education's for the young. Work is for people in their power years, not for old people. And some kind of retirement, going away, being out of the picture is for old people. If you're lucky, I guess. It's for old people. And they're not supposed to be mingling. And so we still speak of older students as non-traditional students, although they're becoming more and more traditional students.
That's a euphemism, non-traditional, right?
Mm-hmm. For older students.
So now here's another, so now ageism must have pretty profound effects on the economy and on our society, I would think.
It's so huge. And that's my, I just love it that you said that, because if you learn all the things you can't be and can't do, and they're just pounded into you, and you look in the mirror one day and you're the person who can't do those things and can't be those things, you don't do them. Just say, let's reacting to aches and pains. Let's say you just turned 50 or 60 or 70, and you wake up one day and, stretch, it hurts. Oh, well, that's because I'm old. It could be because of something that's very simple to fix. It could be because of some illness or a flu or something. It's just very easy to fix. You go to your doctor, and which you wouldn't do because you say, I'm old, and what's my doctor going to do about that, right? Well, let's assume, so you avoid a lot of early detection opportunities are lost, by the way, that way. But so, okay, that's one impact of ageism, and that's very expensive. The other thing is, okay, let's say somebody's adult child or good friend says, go to the doctor, Tom. That doesn't sound right to me. And so you go, and your doctor says, well, Tom, how old are you? And you say, well, I'm 50. And the doctor says, oh yeah, well, you're going to have a few aches and pains, and may overlook a diagnosis of bone cancer or so it's deeply embedded in society and has costs of that sort. The other sort is that when people do leave their career that they had in their power years, they may have an awful lot of talent left, things that they can do. They'll run into ageism in both the educational institutions to try and get retooled in many cases, or they'll run into ageism in the workplace, so they can't be reemployed, and they're on the shelf. And the cost of that to the economy, A, keeping them on the shelf, and B, not using them as a resource, is enormous. Enormous. Here we have a very stressed economy. And then we're going to blame it on old people.
So now, briefly, because I want to get into the solution at some point soon.
Oh, good.
soon.
We should have a solution. Everything should have every problem should have a solution.
Reverse ageism.
Okay.
What is reverse ageism? And
well, it's not a solution.
No.
It doesn't.
I know that.
Reverse ageism is basically what young people go through. Like you say, well, you young whippersnapper, or you're a kid. What do you know? I know you think you're in love, Tom, but understand, son. At your age, that is definitely reverse ageism. Sometimes employers will say, well, we really need an older person in this job. More likely, they'll say, we need some more youth and vigor. Both of those things are ageism, but only one of them is illegal.
So it's all about prejudging based on appearance, or preconceived ideas.
In programmed, automatic knee-jerk thinking.
Things we've been taught by society.
You just said such a wonderful word, prejudging. Let's break down the word prejudice. That's what prejudice is. It's prejudging. People are so unique. We have lots of old people who live up to every negative stereotype. They're cranky, they're mean, they're decrepit. We have young people who live up to those stereotypes. Well, I don't know.
Now, okay, so we only have a few minutes left, so I really want to talk about what can we do to help solve this problem? What can we do? And I think you and I, when we were talking before, that it's all an inside job was what we had talked about.
You coined that phrase. I'm going to use that in my classes. Okay. It's all an inside job. But not all, but it's one of those things like there's a prerequisite to resolve this problem. We have to have people who are able to go inside their own hearts and minds who want to help solve this problem, either through their compassion for others or their love of themselves or their families. To solve this problem, we need to be able to examine, first of all, what do we think about being old? What do we think about old people? When we do surveys, we find that if we ask people general questions about their wellness, their wealth, all these things in life, and how well do they think they're off, about 30% of them, 30% more of them will say there are big problems for old people than will say they're big problems for themselves. So you just know, we have all kinds of evidence that we are all affected with this flu, this ageism virus. Right. So we know that comes with the wonderful things that are also in our cultural package, but it's one of the not so wonderful things, so we need to work on that. Examine yourself, and then your reactions, get some education, do some reading, and then watch for it around you, and you'll see it.
Keep an open mind and to learning new
open
techniques
up.
And new. And yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking about how these old ideas, our own limited thoughts, and freeing ourselves of our limited thinking, not only about this, but certainly about this, and looking at where I learned to have these thoughts and these ideas about age. And so.
And you look at other people and you see their beauty or their ability and see how it's trapped in their own idea of themselves. And then be loving to them and try and help them come out and look, see themselves, and then they'll help you see yourself. And these economic problems, the economic cost of this is huge, and the human cost, the cost of human suffering is big too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holly. My guest today has been Dr. Lynn Holly, Professor of Gerontology at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. My name is Tom White, and please remember, it's never too late to live and learn.
What does Medicare cover? How can I afford to keep living in my home? When I need help with house and yard work, who can I turn to? Why am I so tired? Am I eating right? Should I exercise? Where can I go for answers to my questions about aging?
Aging Partners is the place to call when you have questions on aging. Our experts are here to help you with unbiased answers for you or your loved ones. Aging Partners, we're only a phone call away.
A thought on tolerance from CeeLo Green, contemporary singer-songwriter. Tolerance, compromise, understanding, acceptance, patience. I want these all to be very sharp tools in my shed. A quote from CeeLo Green.
Hi, I'm Lita Powell Drake, and my special guest today is Danielle Conrad. She's the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, or as we call ACLU.
That's right, yes.
And
that's right.
They have such a fascinating history. Can you explain a little bit about how this came to be?
Absolutely. This beloved organization was founded almost 100 years ago and is one of the longest running and most well-established civil rights organizations in the country. This organization has affiliates in all 50 states and a national umbrella group. And we really work at the front lines in the legislature, in the courts, and through community organizing to promote and protect civil liberties that are guaranteed to all persons in our Bill of Rights.
And so when did Nebraska become a part of the ACLU?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. So Nebraska formed their affiliate just about 50 years ago. Next year we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary in Nebraska. So
Why did it take so long?
Well, you know, the different affiliates were established at different times, and that was the time period when a group of Nebraskans came together and said that they'd like to have a presence in our state. So we've been on the ground here in Nebraska for about 50 years, and we're really excited to have that celebration next year.
Now, when did you become the executive director?
Well, I am a brand new part of the Nebraska ACLU history. I actually just came on board full-time in November 2014.
Oh.
So I am brand new to the organization, but excited to be at the helm of this fantastic group of talented lawyers and communications experts and community organizers who are out working every day in every corner of Nebraska to ensure that our basic rights are defended.
Well, one of the basic rights that we as females are concerned about is equal pay for equal work. Now, where do we stand with regards to that issue, Danielle?
Yes, absolutely. You know, we've made good progress in this country and in Nebraska in providing some basic protections for women in the workplace. However, our work is not done and work remains on the table. We need to continually be vigilant to update and modernize both federal and state law to ensure that we do indeed have equal pay for equal work. Because even with some basic protections in place, we still see considerable disparities. The studies show that most women who work commensurate positions to our male counterparts in the workplace earn only about 77 cents on the dollar. The disparities are even greater for women of color. So we have some work to do.
I think the women of color only earn 56 cents on the dollar.
That's absolutely right, yes. So we have some important work to do to modernize our statutory framework to ensure that we get closer to full equality when it comes to equal pay, because not only is that important for basic rights and to eliminate discrimination for women in the workforce, but it has so many important impacts for families. And as more and more women are either the sole breadwinner or the leading breadwinner in the family, it impacts family stability and strength. And that impacts our communities. So when we have discrimination, when we have disparities, it's not just a women's issue. It's an issue that affects us all.
Well, I think receiving not what I would hope to receive in my career, I was always paid less than the men. They got the women a lot cheaper. And of course, because if we have children, they have to be taken care of, and usually it's the woman's responsibility, or has traditionally been. Men at least are making some effort now to help in the raising of the children, but that's been a major issue. The woman has been stuck with that responsibility, which gives the men the opportunity to be free and clear and rise up in the organization.
Right. Well, Lita, absolutely. From your firsthand experience as a pioneer, who was a woman who was really leading in Nebraska's media over so many years, I'm sure that you have seen those experiences in your own life and with other employment contexts. And I think that hopefully you would agree we are making progress, but indeed we have so much more work to do. And the reason we made progress is because women were willing to speak out, because women were willing to fight for their rights and to share those stories and share the impacts of those disparities with their policymakers. And we need those same voices today.
And we need those women to stand up and and demand, if they're going to replace somebody, a male in a job, just ask for that salary.
Yes,
to stand
absolutely.
up for their own rights.
And it's greater than just improving your negotiation skills. There are structural and legal barriers that continue that pay disparity. So we really need to update our laws to make sure we have better disclosure so that women can accurately evaluate whether or not there's a pay disparity for similar work in their employment context. And we need to do more to eradicate employment discrimination for pregnant workers as well.
Speaking of pregnant workers, I hope some of you read this case because it went to the Supreme Court about a UPS driver, a female, who, she got pregnant. And so therefore they didn't want her to have to carry. This is the woman, her name is Peggy Young.
Yes, that's right.
And she didn't want to lift packages that weighed over 20 pounds, which is understandable. And you think about most UPS drivers are males, and they got to lift all these heavy packages. But so she asked to just lift nothing on, over 20 pounds, and they said, no, that's impossible. And so she was really out of a job. However, they allowed men who had hurt themselves on the job or hurt their back, that they could continue to work and still only have to lift 20 pounds or less. So there was certainly a disparity there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that case?
Absolutely. This case has captured so many headlines in Nebraska and across the country because it is shocking, I think, to many citizens to realize that this type of discrimination is still happening in our workplaces and even at a big company like UPS. But while we have those basic protections on the books, so to speak, at both the federal and state level, we need to update, we need to modernize those laws and put more teeth into them so that situations like this don't continue to happen. And what this issue is so important is because it's just about basic fairness and ensuring that female employees who become pregnant, and most female employees will become pregnant at some point in their lives, have the same basic rights and protections as their male counterparts to receive appropriate accommodations as per their medical orders from their healthcare professionals.
And Justice Kagan, which was interesting, she really took a strong interest in this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that we're all watching very carefully to see how the court rules on that case. It was a lively debate at the Supreme Court level. And what's fascinating, in addition to the legal and the policy issues involved therein, is this is one of those issues that really cuts across the political spectrum. The ACLU was joined at the Supreme Court with Right to Life groups that all came down on the same side of saying it's time to end pregnancy discrimination in the workplace. And when you have those types of unlikely allies coming together, it's such a powerful and strong voice that is coming down on the side of women.
Well, I thought in this particular case with Peggy that the Supreme Court ruled in her behalf. Am I correct in that?
We just had oral arguments recently, and so we're waiting to hear what the decision will be. But there had been previous court decisions at the lower court levels coming up, and in some other states as well. So we've seen a real mixed bag when it comes to courts and their review of existing pregnancy discrimination laws, and that's why we're all eager to have some additional clarity from the Supreme Court when the Young decision will be announced.
Oh, there's so many fascinating issues with regard to the ACLU, and one of them, of course, is same-sex marriage.
Yes, that's right.
Now, it's my understanding that 36 of the United States have now been receptive to same-sex marriage. That is incredible.
It is incredible. Yes, we are witnessing history in our very midst, and this issue has changed just at lightning speed, both in the courts and in the courts of public opinion, where you see not only additional legal protections being extended through citizen initiative at the legislatures and through the courts, but also when you look at the public opinion polling, this is an issue where hearts and minds are changing, and all people are waking up and recognizing that it's time to allow the freedom to marry for our citizens and full equality and participation
it's
for all.
It's a remarkable change. When
is.
You think it wasn't that many years ago that same-sex marriage was only allowed in about 5 or 6 states and the District of Columbia, and now 36 states. I mean, they're just coming
and counting.
And you said South Dakota?
Just recently, yes.
South Dakota has just come on board.
Yes.
And so Nebraska is surrounded by states,
all
of whom are accepting same-sex marriage now, except Nebraska.
It is striking that Nebraska is so out of step with our sister states, our neighboring states on this topic. And the ACLU of Nebraska was so proud to file legislation years ago challenging the Defense of Marriage Act, which was successful at the trial court level, but then overturned on appeal. Now we have, because of the changing legal landscape, another chance. We have new precedent from the Windsor decision from the Supreme Court that has really sparked the flurry of additional litigation, and we're back. We filed suit in Federal District Court in November 2014 on behalf of 7 wonderful Nebraska families challenging the discrimination that is enshrined in our Constitution. We have our first court hearing on that case at the end of January, and we are very confident in our legal position and our clients, and are hoping that we'll have a lot to celebrate
in
in 2015.
The Supreme Court will take this on?
You know, it's one of those things they teach you in law school. It's kind of law school 101. You never bet on what a court's going to do. But most legal observers are encouraging or hopeful that the Supreme Court will pick up these cases now that we do have somewhat of a circuit split, so that we do have a definitive, clear, and uniform answer on these topics. But you never know what the court's going to do, so we needed to proceed at the state level as well, and to ensure our place in this changing legal landscape, and to recognize the fact that it's time to end this discrimination for Nebraska citizens who are paying taxes, who are raising families, who are contributing to our economy, but who are denied the same rights and protections that comes with marriage that the rest of us enjoy.
Well, it's fascinating, the cases that the Supreme Court does decide. They can't take everything.
That's right.
And there are a lot of inequities in our society,
That's right.
you know, which ought to go to the final court of appeals, as it were. But they can't take everything.
That's right.
And so we hope that this is going to go there to clarify that.
We do, and we're going to keep working here in Nebraska on the ground level and wait and see what the court does at the Supreme Court level. But this is an issue of not if, but when. When will the freedom to marry come to Nebraska? Will it be through a national Supreme Court decision? Will it be through our case? That remains to be seen. But we're not going back. That's the good news. We're moving forward. And as more and more states enjoy the freedom to marry, now something like 70% of Americans live in a jurisdiction that allows the freedom to marry. And that's good news. That's good news for families. That's good news for business. That's good news for civil rights. So we're thrilled to be a part of this effort. And I'll tell you, it was one of the first cases that we filed when I came on board at the ACLU of Nebraska. And we've been overwhelmed by the support from every corner of Nebraska, rural Nebraska, urban Nebraska, older Nebraskans, younger Nebraskans. This is just an issue that has generated such incredible goodwill that it's a really special and fun thing to be a part of.
And Danielle, you're a part of the University of Nebraska system. You went to the
Yes,
law
that's right.
college
Yes,
there,
that's
so
right.
homegrown girl.
That's right.
Now I'm going to stand up for everybody's rights.
That's right. Go Huskers. I am absolutely a proud graduate of the University of Nebraska and University College of Law, and am proud to be using the skills that I learned there to fight for the rights of all Nebraskans.
Well said, Danielle Conrad, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union in Nebraska. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Oh,
It was just
thank you
a joy
very
to
much.
meet you, and we do wish you well.
Oh, thank you so much for the generous invitation and for having this important programming to bring important issues to our citizenry. So Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you again.
And remember, it's never too late to live and learn more about the Nebraska ACLU.
What does Medicare cover? How can I afford to keep living in my home? When I need help with house and yard work, who can I turn to? Why am I so tired? Am I eating right? Should I exercise? Where can I go for answers to my questions about aging?
Aging Partners is the place to call when you have questions on aging. Our experts are here to help you with unbiased answers for you or your loved ones. Aging Partners, we're only a phone call away.
A quote on tolerance from John F. Kennedy. Tolerance implies no lack of commitment to one's own beliefs. Rather, it condemns the oppression or persecution of others. President John F. Kennedy.
Hello, I'm your host, Tim Francis, for this episode of Live and Learn. My guest today is Kimberly Taylor Riley with the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights. And we're going to talk about tolerance, perhaps intolerance, among minorities in the protected classes. Kimberly, how long have you been in this job?
I've been in this position now almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years next month.
So you take phone calls from the public?
Yes.
About fair housing, job discrimination, concerns people have?
Right. It's housing, employment, and public accommodation discrimination.
And what are the protected classes under the law? currently?
Right now we have race, sex, age. We have color, religion, national origin, ancestry. We have disability, retaliation, marital status, and familial status, which generally go together.
Size of household and
Well, yes, it can be, usually, but that only applies to housing. Age only applies to employment.
okay, gotcha. And those protections have been in place for,
For a number of years, yes.
and then more have added. I mean, they were phased in as society required them, or
Well, they're added in
Lobby.
over time.
yeah.
What happens is they initially, back in, I think it was 1964, was the initial Civil Rights Act. And then over time, things have been added as they saw need, based on the relationships of folks over time. They started seeing that there were needs for other protected classes to be added, and so over time, they've been added through legislation.
My question today is, I want to discuss a little bit. Tell us what GLBT stands for. I see that in the newspaper. I have a clue what it means, but tell our viewers.
It's gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual. So they're just initials.
Okay, representing that population.
Yes.
There are some protections in place, but other places not. Is it kind of an emerging protected class?
Well, I can't say it's really an emerging protected class. That's probably not a fair assessment. If you lived in Omaha, they have a local ordinance that actually protects, I believe it's sexual orientation, but it's only in employment. It's not in housing, and it's not in public accommodation. The federal government protects some other matters that have to do with gender identity, but they protect it under sex. And it's protected, and it generally doesn't make much sense to people, but it's failing to conform to gender stereotypes is how the language is worded. And so people who fall into that category are protected under the federal law. So unless you're protected by that kind of small nuance in federal law or protected specifically by a local ordinance, then you don't fall into any protected class.
So in Nebraska, there's no protection, particularly under state level.
Not at the state level, no. Not unless you fall in, because we also, of course, the federal law applies to the states and to the municipalities. So the federal law that carved out that protection, that applies to everybody. So that applies across the board. If you want protection that has to do with housing, that has to do with public accommodation, unless you fall into a category that's been set out by where you live, no, then you don't have that protection.
So there's a kind of a movement, I think, to gain more protection. Was that kind of, I'm seeing more headlines along those lines?
I think that there's certainly a need for it. I guess we should start there.
Please.
There's certainly a need. Whether or not we can get legislation to come along and reflect that need is a little bit different question. So at this point, what's happening is that I know there's been data gathered and research that's gone on relative to how frequent this occurs and to how it affects those populations of folks. Now we have to get moving on the other end and try to get legislation that reflects that and that applies some protections for those folks.
What would be a typical instance of intolerance or lack of acceptance of this particular minority group? What kind of calls would you expect to get?
We don't get very many calls in this regard, and I think that's partially because we don't have any protections for it. So those folks kind of over time have learned that there just isn't really very much that can be done about it. But some of the cases that we have seen, one in particular was out of Iowa, and what happened was it was a young lady that worked at a hotel, and she was one of the main front desk people at the hotel. She preferred to dress in the male uniform, and they had a male uniform and a female uniform. She preferred to dress in the male uniform, which was basically a polo shirt and khaki pants. So that's how she dressed when she reported for work. It was the uniform, it was just generally the male uniform. She had done such a good job that they had promoted her in that position, so she kind of became their main front desk person for the shift that she worked. And that seemed to be going along fine until someone came down from the corporate office that was physically removed from this location and saw her at the front desk and said, how is it that we have this person at the front desk? And they went on to say what a great job she had done and how they had recently promoted her to the position. Well, this member of their corporate staff thought that that was not appropriate at all and did not care for the way that this person expressed herself. And so they removed that person from that promotion and reposted the position to let other people apply for it, and basically demoted her.
Because of her choice of wardrobe.
Because of her choice of wardrobe and the way that she presented herself in the workplace. So it wasn't that she was out of uniform, she just didn't wear the female uniform, she wore the male uniform. And because of that, that case was filed and eventually went up through the court system, and the court determined that that was considered to be discrimination on the basis of sex because it fit into that failing to conform to gender stereotypes. You're a woman, so I would expect you to wear the female uniform, but you're wearing the male uniform. And some kind of employment action that was adverse to her was taken on that basis.
That's kind of an interesting way of viewing the world, as male, female, either or.
Right.
And I've heard the term fluid applied to sexuality, that people can shift from what they're attracted to at different times of their lives. But talk about intolerance a little bit, or incidences we see of bullying in the schools perhaps, or how the public sometimes express their intolerance towards other people who aren't quite like them.
Well, I think we see it in lots of different ways, and we see it in things that aren't necessarily protected classes. For instance, you may see it with respect to someone who's overweight. Now, recently, the ADA has said that obesity can be considered a disability, but that was very recent. In the past, that wasn't the case. Or in the event that you have, for instance, pictures on your desk, because most of us in our offices will have pictures of our family displayed on our desks. Well, if you're in a same-sex relationship, you may not have a photograph of your significant other because you don't know what kind of fallout there might be in your workplace in the event that people were to know that. We all just kind of assume that you're like me. So if you're in a heterosexual relationship, you may assume that I am as well. If that's the case, and I'm not, I may be a little nervous about, well, if I have that picture of my significant other, who happens to also be a female, on my desk, what kind of response am I going to get from my coworkers, from people who come into my office to seek services? So it's kind of a subtle thing that seems to happen. Sometimes it's something we do to ourselves where we decide not to demonstrate that part of our lives. Other times it's just that you happen to show up. There have been instances where people have gone, for instance, to restaurants, and they've been with their partner at the restaurant, and the restaurant has put them on the list and they never get a table. Or if they get a table, it's somewhere in the back that's far removed that nobody would see them, and they're back kind of in a corner in the dark.
Not to offend someone's sensibility.
Exactly, exactly. So sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it's not something that's overt and something that you can say, yes, this is exactly because of this. Sometimes it's more subtle than that. But the fact of the matter remains that it is certainly present, and that because there are no specific protections for that, you now have license to treat people, at least not treat them equitably.
Interesting. What would be your thoughts, your conclusions, or your observations on the benefits of having a more inclusive culture, a more welcoming culture in our country?
Well, I think part of what makes our country what it is that we have so much diversity. We have so many different people that come from so many different places, and that we incorporate so many things into our day-to-day living that come from other people's cultures. It's just kind of normally what we do. When we try not to do that, then we are purposely excluding people from the conversation. We're leaving out a whole aspect of something that we probably hadn't even considered before now. If we don't leave ourselves open to those things, then we don't give ourselves the opportunity to learn and to grow and to become even better than what we are now. Diversity is what makes us a good culture and a positive culture, and not having that certainly is a negative.
Well, and there's certain economic benefits to inclusiveness?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, think about how many restaurants we wouldn't have in the event that we weren't allowed to have restaurants that had Indian food and that had Asian food and now we have the fusion restaurants.
Right.
But we have all kinds of different things that are part of our culture on a day-to-day basis. Things in the theater, all over the place. And that's because we have so much diversity and so much cross-culture exposure. It would certainly be a deficit not to have those things.
I appreciate that observation, and thank you. We're about out of time, Kim, so I want to thank my guests. Kimberly Taylor Riley with the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights. We've been discussing fair housing, discrimination, protected classes, all very useful, timely information. I'm your host, Tim Francis with Live and Learn, and remember, it's never too late to live and learn.